We've got more numbers out today from some big players, including Kohl's and Abercrombie. I can tell you Kohl's stock is up nearly 18% right now. So investors liking what they heard there this morning on the earnings call. Abercrombie up nearly 2%. Let's break it all down now with Mary Ross Gilbert, Bloomberg Intelligence's senior equity analyst. She covers retail. So she's the right person to talk to right now. So Mary, Kohl's trying to reverse 14 straight quarters of declining revenue. How'd they do?
Yeah, so Alexis, Kohl's, okay, look, they reported comp sales down still. And as you pointed out, 14 consecutive quarters of declines, or another way to look at it, over the past 3 years, they're cycling 3 years of declines. So, but what really we're looking at in the news that came out with Kohl's, one, is that on the call, the company said July sales were flat. That was really encouraging. And when you look at the third quarter and the guidance for the third quarter, again, still looking for declines for the balance of the year, down 4 to 5% on a comp sales basis. But for the third quarter, they're going to cycle a 9.3% decline last year. So that means the comparisons are easier and they're off to a good start. So it's encouraging. And what we're finding is that they're bringing back the core private brands that are really resonating because they're the open price points, and their core consumer, which is that sort of low to low middle income consumer, they're really pressed by inflation still. And so they are really looking for the value. And as they've brought that back in, and they brought back fashion jewelry, and they're working on refining fine jewelry, but that's all resonating now with the customer. And so that's where they're seeing some strength. And so we're seeing encouraging signs there, but they're not out of the woods yet, right? Because, again, 3 years of comp sales declines, and their sales are still declining. So we'll see if they actually reach stabilization by the end of the year. They're saying, no, we're not, but we're thinking they're providing conservative guidance so that they can beat. And then with regard to the stock action, part of that reflects short covering. If you look at the shares borrowed, it's about a third of the outstanding shares are borrowed. So it's going to take over 5 days to cover, shorts. And so that's part of the action in there.
Hey, Mary, what are Kohl's and some of the other companies saying about, their strategies for dealing with tariffs in terms of A, passing along to consumers, B, taking it maybe in their margin, or C, kind of pushing back on some of their suppliers? Is there a consensus building about how some of these retailers are dealing with it?
Yeah, Paul, that's a really good question, because tariffs is absolutely top of mind. And with Kohl's really sources most of their product from other brands and companies. They do have their own private brand business. It's probably somewhere around a third of the business. They're getting it back in order because, of course, they went too low last year. And what they're finding is they're sharing with their vendors. This is what we're finding across the board. And they're finding an ability to raise prices on select items. So with Kohl's, we did see a margin improvement in the quarter. And so because the private brands do deliver a higher margin on an overall basis versus the third-party brands, they're getting that benefit, and that's helping to offset a bit of the tariffs. And again, they're less impacted versus some of the specialty apparel brands like Abercrombie and PVH and those companies reporting, which they did disclose what kind of exposure they have. But we are seeing across the board that there is sharing. It's usually about 50%, where the suppliers will say, we'll absorb 50% of the cost, and then the other 50% is taken by that brand. Then they will do strategic price increases on certain items that they feel will be less noticeable to the consumer.
Mary, before we get to Abercrombie, one more question here on Kohl's. Bloomberg News is reporting that Kohl's is having trouble paying its vendors on time. What do we know about that?
Alexis, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was never brought up on the call. Nothing came up in that conversation. When we saw that article break yesterday, we said, what? That's kind of like a warning sign. And it basically says, look, they're just trying to manage their working capital needs, because we're in a period right now where they're taking in all of the inventory that for the holiday season. That's coming in right now. And so that's a big cash use. And that's kind of where we are in the third quarter, is where they're going to have to, raise their revolver borrowings to fund those needs. And so there was a bit of a concern, but nobody on the earnings call brought that up with the company. But we're watching that closely. Like I said, Kohl's is not out of the woods yet.
All right, Abercrombie, what's the story there?
So on Abercrombie, generally they beat, but okay, and it was all led by Hollister, which we could see in the transaction data, and it was something that we saw in the first quarter, and they're cycling some big comparable sales increases in the prior year period for their namesake Abercrombie brand. But the decline in comp sales, was down about 11%, was way worse than what analysts were looking for. They were looking for a decline of, something like down 7%. The reason for that is they had some carryover inventory at lower average price points that they were selling through in the quarter, and that's what really took the comp sales down. But they were very optimistic about, third quarter start with their denim program, with their NFL collaboration. And so they feel like that's going to really benefit all of the initiatives that they have to benefit the Abercrombie brand going forward. So they feel like, no, this is just a little bit of a hiccup, nothing to be alarmed about. And I think what we're seeing generally when we think about all these earnings reports so far is that the consumer is resilient. We have the lower income being a little more strained and being very careful and choosing what they're going to buy, but when they see the value, they're spending. And then of course, when you get the consumer that's in a better position, they're definitely spending. And denim is top of mind right now, fashion denim, especially, some of that looser, baggy and low
We're going to have to, Mary, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks so much for that reality check on all things retail. Mary Ross Gilbert.